If you get a team composition that has like 3 only DPS players and 3 only support players, even if they're flexible, it's gonna be really hard, right? Because whoever's playing tank is not gonna be comfortable on the role. And if the enemy team has 2 support players, 2 tank players, and 2 DPS players, they're at a huge advantage. So they're gonna win that game most of the time. And yet the SR system thinks it's, oh, even SR, fair game, right? And I think most people would recognize that that's not really the case. If they just don't pick the right heroes, you do so much better. But that's not because you're a better player or even that you played particularly well. It's randomness. It's from the system gave you the right teammates and gave them the wrong teammates. And to me, the fact that your skill rating would be in any way resultant from that randomness is a very bad thing. And you want to reduce that as much as possible.
Hey, what's up guys, it's Liam or Weagle on your Overwatch, back with a new video today. We're going to be talking about the Overwatch matchmaking system, and we're going to be offering up the biggest constructive criticism we've ever done for this with pro player Jake, who we've spoken about before. And the ultimate goal of this video is to make matchmaking a better place. A lot of people have been wondering why the game's so toxic, and it's getting more and more toxic, and we feel like we know the answer. We will be talking about things like onetricks and the SR reward system. However, none of the criticism is about players themselves, but actually the system and rewarding not team play, but selfish play. As everybody knows, if you want to rank up, then you should be playing for your own stats. But we want to talk about how this creates toxicity inherently and how incentivizing playing with a team is the best way to cure this toxicity and overall just have a better experience in matchmaking overall.
This interview essentially is a follow-up to the first interview that we did with Jake, where we spent more time discussing the inaccuracies of stat collection in order to describe where a player should be ranked. We mentioned those issues here, but more or less gloss over them. And this time, we're more looking at the entire rank system through the perspective of players who are trying and wanting to have a more team-based environment in ranked play. We know not everybody plays the game in the same way. As we said in the first interview, it's very understandable to want to one-trick a hero, either because you want a challenge or in order to see how high you can get only playing that one hero. Maybe it's your favorite hero. There's a lot of reasons to do so, and obviously if players can do that, they will do that. And we don't begrudge any individual as a player for taking that route. Realistically speaking, every player's hero pool is limited. The game is difficult and vast, so it's impossible to play all the heroes anyway. No matter what, you're going to have some inflexibility as a player, and what mentioned here in this interview, the term one trick basically is shorthand for just inflexibility in general. Because even if you can say play all of the DPS heroes, it's still going to be an issue if you have all DPS one tricks on your team as well. We use characters like Mercy, Torb, and Sim as examples in this video, but realistically speaking, we want better team compositions and team play and enjoyable matches for everybody, no matter what type of hero pool you got, and no matter what your approach is to the game. The interview might have benefited from having an opinion that is outside of ours. We are obviously biased towards the competitive mindset, and I know there's many players that like to play the game through the lens of mastering a single hero. The issue is when the SR system benefits specialization over complete game mastery, because as we know, team compositions, hero swapping is a core part of competitive Overwatch, but it's not really being rewarded with the SR system based on how it works now, as we described in the first interview.
This is a long video, guys, so buckle in, let us know what you think in the comments section down below, and know that all we're trying to do is help out the experience of Overwatch. Are you familiar with CSGO?
A little bit.
Well, we were talking about this the other day. Imagine if when you played CSGO, you only played smoke grenade and all you'd done was throw smoke grenades. But because you throw the most smoke grenades, you're now really high ranked. Or you only play pistol, so your team will lose because you never buy an AK, but you're the highest ranked at pistol.
But like, damn, you hit those deagle headshots. It's like, yeah, it's like just playing deagle only or something and popping off. It's like, wow, you're the best deagler in the world. And it's like, well, you're still dying to AKs, but...
Yeah, so have the top rank. There you go, because you're the best deagler, or one of the best deaglers. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, right? If you put it in that context, yeah, in Overwatch, that's exactly how it's built. And your point about like being rewarded for team play, I think, is... the biggest issue in the matchmaker is that there is no incentive to play with your friends, which is a big problem when, you know, trying to learn the game. Because if you search in a 3 or a 4 and you're all masters, you'll get top 500s to play against. You're playing against the best players in the world because you're in a team. And then when you get teammates on your team, you're in a 3 stack, you get some randoms that want to play Symmetra only. well, you get rolled. And when you're in a team, you lose more SR. So not only have you waited longer to find a game, you then don't get rewarded at all for playing in a team because it stacks the SR against you. And there's another thing about playing in a team as well. And the fact that it's based on your solo performance. When you play in a team and you take clean engagements and you win the fights quickly, and you don't poke, so you get no damage, no trash stats at all. When you play in a team, you get bad stats.
Yeah, like if you're playing the game, the really sad thing about stats in this game is if you play properly, you shouldn't have great stats.
Exactly.
Like great stats are usually the mark of mistakes, right? If you have like 90% accuracy on Genji, like you are actually super fucking up because that means you're not spamming, like you're not blind spamming corners, you're not like long range left clicking on, you know, shit that you're gonna do 1 damage to, like to build Dragon Blade, you know, like you should be doing those things. But if you want the best stats and the highest accuracy, but you don't do those things, which is, I don't know, it always seems insane to me that there would be any incentive to do something that isn't win the game, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
What else are we here for, right? Like, I mean, they're supposed to capture points. This isn't team deathmatch. Kills are only a means to an end, right? Damage is only a means to an end.
I think a lot of these points lead to something that you said in your blog post about the signifier or the legitimacy of what like the ranked number actually means. And the problem with Overwatch is that as opposed to other esport games, which have a very defined skill set, even different roles in the game, in other games oftentimes are more similar to each other, whereas in Overwatch, like the difference between Reinhardt and Widowmaker is miles apart, right? And then you could say again for Mercy and to other things. When you get these roles, these random assortments of teammates with ideally, you know, similar SR, right? It seems like the system is calculating to have the SR on both sides be as close to 50-50 for each match to make them as, quote, fair as possible. But because of the way that each player's potential impact varies based upon their hero selection, that SR number isn't really correlated to what they actually could impact in that game that they're being queued for. I hope that made sense. That was like a really elaborate way to explain it, but
yeah, definitely. I think it's a really good point, which is that, you know, and I think it kind of comes back to the idea of randomness, and that you know, in my mind, in a competitive game, you want as little randomness as possible. You want everything to be defined by the players in the game and like what the decisions they make once the game has begun. Like that, I mean, that seems sort of obvious, right? But it feels like that's the only thing that should matter. On average, right, everyone's going to have the same number of one-trick teammates. In the end, I don't think this is like a super distorting effect on people's SR. Like, I don't think this is the reason that you can get quote-unquote like stuck in plat or whatever, because, you know, it's sort of equal with everyone. Everyone has equally bad games. But each individual game is so deeply randomized by that factor, right? Like everyone has had those games where they're like, oh, we have 2 Mercy mains. Oh, it's cool. The enemy team has 4, right? Like sometimes it just feels like you're like flipping a coin to see who gets a better team composition. And sometimes, some games, both teams have similar good or bad team compositions, and then the game is like interesting. Then the game is, you know, one player can do well and can cause his team or her team to you know, find victory, right? Like their play can make the difference and win the game. And like that's what you want. Like that's the ideal, where the compositions are basically equal and it's up to the players in the game to push themselves over the edge and you know, turn it into a victory. And I just don't think that's there right now. I feel like more games are dictated by they have 5 Mercy mains or we have 5 Mercy mains. You know, and obviously Mercy mains is just one thing, but you can just as easily have the same problem with 4 Tracer players or, you know, a bunch of Winston players or whatever. Like, I think tank players are the rarest problem because most tank players can play a lot of tanks. I think it's the most common role to be flexible on. But for DPS and support especially, if you get a team composition that has like 3 only DPS players and 3 only support players, even if they're flexible, it's gonna be really hard, right? Because whoever's playing tank is not gonna be comfortable on the role. And if the enemy team has 2 support players, 2 tank players, and 2 DPS players, they're at a huge advantage. So they're gonna win that game most of the time. And yet the SR system thinks it's, oh, even SR, fair game, right? And I think most people would recognize that that's not really the case.
A lot of people are getting frustrated with the toxicity. If you look back over the last 2 months in Overwatch community, whether it be videos people have made, streamers quitting the game, it's all about the quality of the matches, right? The quality of the matches that you play. It's mistake-based matchmaking, I think. It's what we call it. And you're always just hoping you have less one-tricks than they do, and it just inherently becomes toxic. And I think where all the frustrations that people come from, they don't realize that it is the SR system. They don't realize that it is because every game is really random. So when you play in some of the lower ranks, you realize that every game is you roll them or they roll you nearly every single time. There's never a competitive match, really. Maybe 1 in 50.
I mean, I think I saw there's the developer video where they said, hey, everyone, like, we realize toxicity is a problem. We're going to step up punishments for toxic players, and we want you to be nice to each other. That's the next feature we're rolling out, is that we want you to be nice to each other. And to me, that is incredibly short-sighted. To think that you're going to change the players, I don't even think punishments are a particularly good solution, because some amount of people, certainly, who are like real toxic players, who are like going to be toxic every single game, no matter what. Like, they're just kind of like hateful people. Like, we know those people exist in real life. Like, okay, no surprise that they're also in video games. And I agree that maybe stepping up punishments helps for that, 2% of players that are like really toxic all the time and get banned for it. But I think for most players, they don't even think of themselves as being toxic. They're just like super frustrated by an individual game, and maybe that game frustrates them, and now they're pissed off for the next few games. Maybe their cat died today and they're just pissed off, right? Like, you can't really account for that. It seems to me that there's 2 parts to toxicity. There's the system itself and the players who participate in the system. And when you're the game developer and you want to change the players as opposed to changing the system, I don't understand like the logic there. I don't understand why they think that getting people to be nicer is a more realistic solution than making the system such that it encourages people to be nicer, right? Like, there's a really key distinction between those 2 things.
You wrap that point up kind of for me. It comes back to the people in this system are playing it for different reasons. Some people are trying to win, like, at any means. They want the win, right? They just want to play a competitive game, and the other half, or whatever the percentage is, want to go in and win on the thing that they want to play. So I feel like all of this toxicity, rank frustrations, quality of matches, it all comes back to that same point that you made at the start, which is, what are we here to play today? How many one tricks do I get?
And I think it also exacerbates the problem with the way the system is now, because you have some of these players who are super competitive and just want to win, and they feel like you can't rely on teamwork in this game, in this ranked system. So I'm just gonna one trick tracer and just like and just get better at the game, and eventually I'll just be like a god and start carrying my team and will win and get high SR, and then once I get high SR, my games will be good again. It's a reasonable thing to believe. I mean, it's totally false, like, to think that getting high SR will make your games better. It doesn't really help at all. The games they are about the same. Like, most of them are rolls one way or the other. You still have a bunch of one trick players, still have a bunch of people who don't take it seriously or compete, or even want to do well particularly. So I think that, like, there's a deep problem in that the system incentivizes even some players who might otherwise be flexible and like want to just like do whatever it takes to win, feel like that's not the way that they should behave, because they want to get high SR so that they can have those competitive games, right? Like, even the players who want that flexibility and who aspire to it maybe choose not to do that or to exhibit those attributes because they're thinking about their SR and because they want to improve and get high SR and play better games. So I think that even some players who wouldn't otherwise do it, who aren't like coming to the game like, I only like Tracer, so I'm only gonna play Tracer, they get to that point because the system pushes them there. The system incentivizes them to play that way and to approach the game that way. That's really sad, right? The players who come into the game and they like want to be flexible and they like want their team to work together realize that that's not a viable strategy and shift away from it. And I think that that's like really bad, that a competitive player can't find what they're looking for in Overwatch.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we did. We were trying to 6-stack for months when the game came out, and I was like, fuck this. I just picked Tracer and got to GM like a week later, because I could play Tracer well, and I just one-tricked it. I've been doing tests ever since just to see what you can get away with, and honestly, it's astonishing. The Mercy example for me is the craziest, right? I went on a massive loss streak because I was getting loads of Mercy mains. I wasn't great at Mercy myself, and yet I can maintain nearly Masters on like a 15% win rate. Doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. It's crazy.
And I know from speaking to you last time, Jake, that if I can accurately describe your views on this, you ideally would want a more pure solo queue experience for the ranking system, and we kind of clash on that. We want team play more than anything, and I think a lot of players, especially at the majority of ranks, the rank itself, we're not going to reach where you're at anyway, so we'd rather just have the quality of our matches go up. And the truth was, sadly, even though you couldn't gain SR whatsoever matching with multiple players, although of course obviously there's a small examples queuing at 3 a.m. or the top 3 players on the server queuing together at the same time. There's these niche examples, but generally speaking, for the majority of people, you just simply won't gain SR. You'd have to never lose, basically, to barely gain SR. It's not efficient, and it definitely isn't fair or reasonable or viable, but the quality of those games were so great all of the time. That's the sad thing.
But you're waiting 10-15 minutes, right? That sucks. We were waiting real long time to play. Like, it takes up so much of your playtime as well, though. But yeah, you're right. Sorry, carry on.
That's the most reliable way, other than roll queue, which I think that's probably where I'm going to have to lean to agree with you, probably reluctantly even, that's the only way to make this system make sense, because as long as you have some structure of expectation within your team that you're looking to work with each other, whatever that means, whatever strategy you want to go with, it at least will have a conducive, like, formulation of what that strategy is. It isn't like I'm hoping and praying that it all just works together in this deathmatchy environment. It's actually attempting to do something as a team. Whereas in a role queue that kind of works its way out, the only problem is really defining what different roles mean, right? What are even the roles? Some people say it is just DPS, and then if you are like a hybrid character of some sort that is somewhat niche, whether that's a builder or other heroes that are more vague in their description, where do they fall? It's difficult, but I think at least that would push us in the right direction of formulating the games to fit in a structured Overwatch-y way, because some players might be better in like a 3 DPS environment versus a 2-2-2 or triple tank. But even though there's those permutations that sort of wreck the 2-2-2 role queue setup, at least you would assume somewhat, if you're like a flex tank player, you probably can play a DPS or two, right, as well, or a support somewhere in there. Because really, we're talking about a shooter game. Like, a lot of the heroes' skill sets are similar, and they cross role selection lines anyway.
Like, you should have a DPS who can play Zarya, so he can go triple tank or something, right? Like, but that's not even out of the question. Like, you know, like, it's not like most players, I think, who play DPS at a high level have like at least some of the off tanks that they're, you know, comfortable on. And I think the same is true for off tanks, like, because all the heroes that can aim are, like you said, like there is some fundamental similarity. Obviously, there's you know, every hero is unique and they all have their different playstyle and their different technical skills. But, you know, if you can track on Tracer, you can probably track on Soldier, realistically. If you can track on Soldier, you can probably track on Diva. You know, maybe you're not the best Diva, but, you know, it's like you can get there. You can, you know, play what your team needs at the very least. It's not like you have no idea what's going on, like you're a Mercy player being asked to play McCree or something, where it's just going to be a really, really bad time. My worry is that, you know, we got to go back to the question of, you know, what are the roles? Like, what, you know, like, imagine a role queue system, what are the roles? And the reality is that the first thing is that there's no builder role. So I mean, if you're a Torb onetrick, that's not a role. Like, that's not, you know, because that's not a competitive mindset. The people who play Torb, sometimes you put a support on it, sometimes you put a DPS on it. It's super map dependent. Those are the characters that are always flexed to. They're never mained. Like, there's no one who plays Torb only in professional Overwatch, because people actually want to win in professional Overwatch. Players who are Torb only or Symmetra only, they shouldn't be allowed to play in the role queue system. And that's the reason that Blizzard will never implement it. You know, like, having that, being really good at Torb can be an asset, right? You can still use that skill, but if you can't play any other character, you're going to be hindering your team a lot of the time. You know, if you're a really great Zen player who also has a great Torb, that's an asset. Because sometimes you say, oh, hey, other healer, just go on, just go Mercy, solo heal, we'll go Torb solo healer. And that's a perfectly legit strategy a lot of the time. But not 100% of the time. That's where I think Blizzard's unwillingness to implement the role queue system comes from. Because they don't want to tell those people who only want to play Torb that you're just not allowed to play the ranked game. You can't really make a role queue system that's like separate from the other system, because that really messes with queue times. If you have half the people in the non-role queue and half the people in the role queue, then queue times are going to be terrible on both of them. And the other reason they don't want a role queue is because DPS players will have super long queue times as well. That's, you know, a super big thing they're worried about, because there's so many DPS is so outsized of a role, so it's so much more popular than other roles that it'll take way longer to get games for those DPS players.
Yeah, I mean, there's other issues with the role queue system as well, like how you build a team comp, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, is it exactly?
Are you running
all the time? I mean, the reality is
one healer, you know, one healer, Soldier, Sombra, maybe, you know, like a lot of the pros will run, you know, like stuff like that. How do you queue for that? Yeah, unless you're queuing with your buddies.
And the thing is, in the pro scene, it's sort of become established what the roles are. You know, there's main support, flex support, main tank, flex tank, main DPS, flex DPS. It's more like hit scan, projectile DPS, but those are It's more about like personal preference, and usually the two DPS are relatively interchangeable. Like most DPS can play a lot of characters. You just put each one on their comfort pick or whatever. And ideally, you have different comfort picks. One Genji player, one Tracer player, one Pharah player, one Tracer player, one Soldier player, one Genji player. Whatever it is. Like you can work it out between the two DPS to find a double that works out, or have one of them play tank if you want to go that route, or have a flex tank go tank or DPS. But all those things are like, those are sort of what has come out of this really strong desire to win in this intense competitive environment in the pro scene. Is here's how you actually assemble a roster that can play what it needs to play to win the game, like can play the best compositions. A thing that Overwatch has that is totally unique, that has no other game has, the ability to like constantly change your composition and constantly change your characters. We talk about MOBA elements, but that's a really non-MOBA element. Like every MOBA that I'm aware of, you cannot change your character. And you become stronger throughout the game. Like there's this whole progression system that just doesn't exist in Overwatch, and the whole lack of swapping is, there's like a really key draft phase where it's very important what you draft, because you don't get a redo on that. But Overwatch has this crucial skill, which is hero swapping and flexibility. So players who are super inflexible aren't really able to participate in that. Like if you only play one hero, you just aren't able to play that part of the game. That's going to be the inherent problem with any role queue system, is that it's really hard to fit players in who can only play one thing into roles that inherently demand them to play at least 2 or 3 things. That's why Face It FPL to me is the real solution. To have a system for people who want that role queue, who are willing to wait a little bit longer for their games because the games are going to be of higher quality. I think the players who want that know who they are, and they know that they want those games, and they'll be willing to go to Face It for them. It makes me sad that Blizzard isn't going to provide that.
I would have to weigh in on that. Role queue ultimately would just fix a lot of issues, though. Obviously, there are more issues that it then creates. However, it would at least organize the matches in a way that I think is objectively more stable than what we have now, ultimately. Like, for instance, even if you do have to say Torb fits in damage, let's just say he's in the DPS category, whatever. At least then you understand how that's going to work out. And then maybe if your support role select players are crafty, they can then decide, well, I'm going to play off tank and we'll solo healer and treat Torb as a support, quote unquote, in that slot, because we know how to work around that. We can play around the Orisa or whatever. And then that would at least feel better to me, I think, than having multiple of the same role one tricks. That's probably even more damaging, I think, than even just having the off like Hanzo or something. Because if you have the off Hanzo one trick, at least well, he's in the damage role. We'll just fill all the other things about Overwatch, and hopefully it'll work out. However, the problem is when he's a Hanzo one trick, and then you have 2 Mercy mains as well, another DPS one trick, and then, okay, now we're forced into playing a very strict type of team comp, right? Like, there's not enough flexibility, whereas at least if they're filling that role, then at least you're going to have the 2 tank players, right? Or, whatever. Like, the expectations of that are different. And also, if you think about it, forcing it into the role queue system will help mitigate a little bit the SR adjustment system that we were talking about, whereas in the current system, it's the stats that you can get comparative to the other players at your rank playing that hero in the system where everybody has these random roles of teammates working all over the place. Whereas at least then we'll be playing an Overwatch where more times than not, you'll have a structured team comp. So it's closer to playing strategical Overwatch rather than deathmatch, scrimmy, stat-based Overwatch, if that makes sense. I think it will legitimize those stats a little bit, because in the role queue system, we're closer to playing Overwatch competitive, right? And you're at least filling your one-trick role in that system, whereas in the system we have now, if you're a Widow one-trick, that is a very strict type of team comp automatically, right? It plays differently.
It's like pick around me or lose. Feel free.
And you would have the teammates to do that in the role queue system, theoretically.
Yeah.
The point. You wouldn't have 5 DPS players as well.
At least better than it is now.
Even if you have to wait 15 minutes for DPS players, queue time.
Yeah, but you would also think that in a role queue system, you would be able to at least report someone for being uncooperative that literally just played one hero, right? Because if it was already more competitive, right, people would be more serious about winning the games. And if you was just getting like a one trick over and over, you would think in that kind of system that that's just being uncooperative, really. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe one-tricking will always be a thing, but I can't see how it can be, even in that kind of a system. I understand that it would be more structured, because you would have 2 tanks, you would have 2 healers, you would have another DPS, and you could pick around it, and you wouldn't have 4 mercy mains. Like, it's still much better, I agree with you, but just being able to just pick Torb even in that system is just obnoxious, in my opinion. Really obnoxious.
Yeah, it's not the end goal, but
any one trick is like you're always going to be holding your team hostage by one tricking. It's like if you pick Torb only, it's like, well, pick Orisa or we lose. Good luck. Like, you know, and then the tank player's like, I don't want to fucking play that hero. That hero's boring as hell. Like, I hate Orisa. But if they're like a flexible player who cares about winning, they will pick that hero because the Torb has like successfully held them hostage. When you one trick, especially like really specialist characters, you're like, all right, there's basically one team comp that you guys can pick for us to win. Because I'm only on Torb, right? Like, I picked one hero, but the only team comps that actually work, including this hero, are like basically the same team comps with like Orisa and Mercy. Like, you need like the right complementary characters to make it even potentially viable, right? Like, and that's, I think, kind of sad too, that players who are flexible are like denied their ability to like pick what they want to play because, you know, there's another player who said, this is what I want to play and I don't really care what you think, right? Like, that to me is a little sad, that we say, oh, everyone pick what you want, like, have fun, but if you care about winning, you aren't really allowed to do that. It's not realistic. Like, you have to pick around what your teammates are or what your one trick players are going to play, because you're like, well, they're not going to change, so I have to. A role queue system sort of levels the playing field, and I really liked your point though, that maybe the role queue system can be a way to save performance SR from itself. The statistics are going to be a lot more significant when you're only comparing DPS players who actually had, you know, tank and support play on their team to other DPS players who actually have tank and support play on their team. And, you know, the level of that tank and support play might vary, but at least you're not comparing the DPS player who happens to have, like, you know, a Mercy pocketing them at all times and, like, you know, Winston always creating space for them. You're not comparing that player against one who gets 5 Mercy mains on their team and gets destroyed, right? Like, I don't know how you can have like meaningful statistical averages when there's that much randomness in team comps. Sometimes you get a really good team comp and you have a huge DPS performance. That's not because you played so much better than every other game. It's because you got so much better of a team comp than every other game that you're in. But the game doesn't know that, right? The game says, wow, great game from you. Let me reward you with a ton of SR. At least if there was more consistency to team comps from a role queue system, then your statistics might actually tell a better story. You know, it might be more meaningful about how you actually contributed to the win, because we know that every DPS player has, on average, the same amount of team support and like and team synergy. Same thing for every role, right? That like they played that role against other teams that had a similarly good team comp. It's very easy to get an insane statistical performance when you play against a terrible team comp with a good one, right? Like, it's like, yeah, I'm just dominating these guys. Like, I play Bastion and they're on like, you know, Winston Roadhog or something. You just dominate people and farm their whole team. Like,
yeah,
if they just don't pick the right heroes, you do so much better. But that's not because you're a better player or even that you played particularly well. It's randomness. It's from the system gave you the right teammates and gave them the wrong teammates. And to me, the fact that your skill rating would be in any way resultant from that randomness is a very bad thing. And you want to reduce that as much as possible. There's always going to be some randomness, but it should be something to avoid, or at least try and design against.
There's 2 points I want to make. The larger one on this, which is the queue time thing, I'm going to leave to the side for a second. But one thing that you said that I think leads us down an interesting path, possibly, is that you can pick around these one tricks in order to build a type of team comp. That's true. That's definitely something that we advocate for. But there's also another strategy that I think is actually more pervasive in matchmaking and, in fact, sort of seeps through all of the ranks. And that is, instead of going for teamwork, like you already know, we're held back and anchored down, at least, in terms of our flexibility based upon this player playing this. You can try to work around it, or you try to play deathmatch and just deathmatch harder by picking whatever your best hero is. It can be from a variety of different things, and try to get value in your way elsewhere on the map.
A tracer, and you just keep the Pharah down, or you keep the soldier down so he can't ever spam the Torb. Like, you just play a really aggressive tracer game to make space for him. Definitely possible. But I agree, that's a much more common strat because it's so much easier to do. It's like, it doesn't require you to be super flexible and able to play every character, which is the only way that you can reliably play around different one tricks, is being ultra flexible, which is pretty.
Or being sick, or being like one of the best players in the world,
yeah,
right?
It is sort of also different when you're like one of the top players, because you can kind of, and I think as a top player, it's even more frustrating to have the one tricks because Like, if you get the one-trick player and you're playing against like super high-rated players, they're just going to counterpick him. And you know that they're going to counterpick the Torb because you know that they're good players. You're like, well, I know that these are like professional players who know how to counter a Torbjorn and know to go like Pharah Mercy and just dominate me. I'll pick Soldier and do my best, but realistically, they're just going to destroy my Torb so hard we're going to be 5v6ing. That's just like a sad reality that it only really affects people at the very top who are playing these super high elo games where it's like just a guarantee that your one trick is going to get counterpicked. You already know that the enemy team is going to counterpick you. So you're just going into the game with just this like, oh my god, like what are we supposed to do? Like all these really good players are going to pick the right characters, and my teammate, who is also super highly rated and the system thinks is going to contribute a ton, is actually just going to get farmed because they won't switch. You want to talk about breeding toxicity? That is a really good way to do it. To have one player who is clearly holding the team back, who everyone is just pissed off at. And then that, once everyone's pissed off, that's just like their next few games they're going to be pissed off. Like once that toxicity is in the system and people have experienced it and gotten pissed off and angry, that they're going to carry forward with that mindset. Games that even don't have one tricks, maybe they're going to just be that angry player who causes it. It's definitely a vicious cycle. But it seems to me that the way you fight that vicious cycle is rather than just like banning people for being part of it and participating in it, maybe you can actually like dig at the roots of that problem. What leads people to be so frustrated at the game?
I would lean towards saying that the majority of success that comes from playing in this environment is just personal skill, over being flexible, actually. Because I think my strengths as a player specifically is more geared towards flexibility. I've studied the game a ton, so I can understand, well, how could we get this Torb to set up in a way that it's advantageous for us? If we have to play with this condition, how do we win that way? However, more times than not, it just comes down to I better have practiced my Widowmaker aim, because how are we going to get Sim on attack Numbani first to work at all? I mean, the enemy's miles away. They're never, unless they make a mistake, like you said, of course, earlier in the interview, where they run into her. We're just basically down a man oftentimes, and I have to just go
and you need
carry.
to get the pick to equalize. Yeah, just pop off. That's the way you win this one. Is you.
And that's not how I want to play. I'm not good enough to do that, right? I can sometimes do it. Don't get me wrong. I practice and I treat the game. I respect the game to the point where I practice, make sure I have that Widowmaker in my back pocket. But I'd rather play tank and support personally. But oftentimes I have to figure out these creative ways to just win this game. And I think most players are in that situation where they just end up putting their hands up in the sky and saying the game's too complex. I don't know how to deal with this, so I'll just play whatever I can. And then the players that are good enough to carry in those situations, they rank through. Now, that's an interesting side point, I guess, on its own right. But to the queue time as well of this role select system, obviously DPS players would wait longer. At the end of the day, I think this is a net positive for the game, because what happens is a big percentage, I think, of players in the community, for instance, play tank purely out of team necessity, not because they're actually interested in learning the role and the mind games and the engagement style. And because we're in a system that rewards stats, oftentimes you get tanks that are good at just playing for stats rather than playing for really smart engagements that win fights outright. They oftentimes are over-aggressive in a way that is getting them active in fights more often. I see that as a trend through the ranks,
they're farming ults way faster, but they're super heal greedy, and their DPS aren't able to use the heals as like a Reinhardt who runs in swinging his hammer is you might do a ton of damage, but your DPS are gonna have no heals and they're gonna be getting farmed. So unless you're actually solo carrying, they play tank like they're a DPS, or Zen like they're a DPS or something, right? Where they're just soaking a ton of heals, and ultimately that's going to hurt their team because you can never use heals as efficiently on a Winston as a Genji can use heals efficiently. It's for the same 100 points of healing from the Mercy, the Genji's going to get a ton more value than the Winston. But if your Winston plays super aggressively, your Mercy has no choice. You have to heal him or else you're going to lose. It just makes your life harder for everyone else on the team. I think that to return a little bit to what you're saying about the game being some people feel like the game's too complicated and they're I don't know how to counter this or how to play around this. I feel like that we have no hope when we get these one trick players. It seems to me that a role queue system also helps with that, because it sort of nudges people in the right direction of trust us, this is a good way to play the game. Trust me, 2 healers is pretty good. You might not believe me, you might think the metagame is made up by pros, but you should believe me that 2 healers is pretty good. Most of the time you want a second healer. It's pretty good. Having 2 healers that are able to heal each other, that's pretty good. You keep each other alive, pretty strong. I agree that some people say the role queue is the meta is not so defined, it can be different things. But even if the role queue system was just guaranteeing me 2 support players in every game and 1 tank player, player, I'd be happy with that, man. Just anything, right? Anything that makes sure that I never get games where even, I don't care if it's my team or the enemy team, getting like 5 of the same role players. It's not even fun to win those games. You're like, well, this guy clearly cannot play anything other than Mercy. It's like we talked about those games where you have like a ton of Mercy mains in the enemy team and it's like a free win. Those don't feel satisfying to me. Like, I don't enjoy those games. They're actually just, it's like boring. It's like, well...
It's exactly what I said to Frito the other day when we played. I'm like, I don't feel good about that win.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, God, like, and talk about a bad thing for a competitive game. Not feeling good about winning is like, that's really bad. Like, that is a very significant problem if you don't enjoy winning, or if like winning doesn't feel satisfying or meaningful. That's like a kind of a death blow to me. Like, it's, it's like
who cheesed who better is basically the...
Or like, you sometimes you see a bad comp in your team, you're like, this comp's not terrible. The enemy team could always pick worse, and then they do pick worse, and you're like, all right, we're back in this game. But then it's such a terrible, I'm glad they threw too. Like, it's so sad. You just like, the actual good Overwatch, like really well played, smart Overwatch, it just doesn't happen in rank, no matter what level you're at.
And I think as well, because back to my tank point, and I think you made some good context to help even develop this further, that because we're in a deathmatchy style meta most of the time in ranked, at least, those tank players are playing that way for frags and stats. However, if there was an incentive for players to go into role queuing tank or support, which there would be, because you could have less queue times, you could rank up faster, and all the matches would simply just be better structured overall on average, even with one tricks. There would be competition for learning tanks, because I think, especially, I mean, even I don't know if you're going to agree with this or not, but I think, at least, the Western region, even the higher ends of the competitive teams, oftentimes, your team wasn't bad for this ever, I would say, but generally speaking, the tank play was pretty weak in terms of their coordination.
General, it's definitely true that like the West has the weak as like very like DPS who are competitive at the top level, but not really. I mean, there are some tanks and supports that are not that there's no one who's really competing at that high level, but it's way more common in like Korea and stuff and I think this stems from the fact that the culture is so like competitive that if you're not focused on winning, people will like flame you out of existence. Like one tricks like don't really exist because people will flip out on you. It's like, it's totally unacceptable to be a Torb one trick in Korea or something. Like you'd be like ostracized. Like people wouldn't want to be your friend or something because you do this. Like it's serious. I mean, it's serious. Like, I mean, you
buy the plane ticket.
You're like the cool kid in high school because you have like people like pay for boosted league accounts, so they like look. It's like a social thing. They look good because they have a high rating or something. So I mean, the culture takes it seriously like to another level in the East and specifically Korea. So I think that look at Korean matchmaking, it doesn't look very much like NA matchmaking. You're not seeing one trick players. It's like people are all trying hard. Like if you watch an average game, there's a ton of calls, like a ton of try harding, even at the high elo, but also even like down the ladder more. People are taking it more seriously, and that might just be a cultural thing. And I think that could lead some people to say, oh, well, why don't you just do that in the West? But again, I think that comes back to like, it's unrealistic to think that you can radically change your players, right? What you can do is change the system to incentivize them further to behave in this way. But when the system is how it is now,
rewarding them for this stuff as well.
Yeah. Then it's like you need an overwhelming cultural expectation to like push through what the system rewards, right? Which is what's happening in Korea in the East. But like it's kind of insane to me that you would need this like really strict competitive culture in order to achieve that, when it seems like there's some key game design things that you could do that make it a little bit easier for people to get on board with it. Just make let the system push people into this more competitive, more team focused mindset. And I think to go back to what you're saying, I think you make a really good point that people would be more interested in playing tanks and stuff if they were guaranteed a more serious team environment. Like playing tanks when your team isn't working together is it's pretty annoying, right? Like
it's the worst thing.
You aren't
ever.
a hero that you aren't a hero that like most of the tank heroes are not supposed to do things by themselves. Like they're not supposed to make solo plays. When you play Winston, you're not supposed to jump in on the Reaper and just YOLO him, right? That's how you get farmed. What you're supposed to do is like jump in on the Reaper right when your Tracer goes in. So then the Reaper can't just run through your shield and fight you. He's being pushed back by the Tracer so that your teammates are getting value from your shield. And the same is true with like D.Va or Zarya, right? That like you defend your teammates and allow them to make a play in conjunction with yourself. And I think that if people had a role queue system and they knew that they had DPS players and support players, and that there was an expectation that they work together, I think people would be more interested in playing roles like tank or support, not only just to have faster queue times, but also because the teamwork element is more reliable. I think part of the reason you see more DPS players than anything else right now, or like more mercy players, like one-trick mercy players, is that those roles are still like fun and rewarding to play when there's no teamwork whatsoever and you're just playing a solo game. Like Mercy can still have fun in a sort of solo queue DM game because you just fly, like people aren't focusing you very well, like you just sort of fly around, hit reses, heal a bunch of people, like have a good time. And right now in NA, those are the most popular heroes, the ones that are fun to play without coordination. And there are some of the heroes in Overwatch are fun to play without coordination. Playing Tracer or Genji, just doing your own thing, is pretty fun sometimes.
It's really fun
but
when
it's sad to me that, but like when you're playing Winston and Ryan, it is not fun. Like I've not met anyone who enjoys playing those characters when they have no teamwork support.
You've made exactly the point I was going to make, but you made it before I got to, which is I would happily play support more in a role queue system. Because I love playing Ana, I love playing Lucio, and I want to learn these different heroes. And I have carried on Ana before, but it's a lot easier to go Tracer and stick a couple of pulse bombs than it is to keep your whole team alive with Ana, as an example.
Mm-hmm. And even Ana is like, you can't carry unless your team lets you carry. Like if your team is playing out of your line of sight, like you're like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like come back in my LOS. Like I literally can't leave. Like I'm in a high ground position. I'm in exactly where I need to be to heal the whole team. I can't leave this position and go heal one guy. So stop going off on your own. But because the system so incentivizes people to go off on their own and do their own thing and just YOLO, then it's super frustrating to play characters like Ana because you're like, what are you guys doing? I can't even play my character right because you aren't doing your roles right. And I think that it has a huge negative impact on characters like you said, like Lucio, Ana, that are very, very team dependent. That's all about enabling your players, right? Ana's all about getting clutch heals off on players who are playing really aggressively in your LOS. It's all about that.
Or hitting a sleep dart.
Yeah, exactly. Like making those big plays, but you can't make those big plays unless your team enables you to do that. That's why you see so many people playing Zen and Mercy, because those characters can do a lot more without teamwork. I mean, right now Zen and Mercy are also just the best supports, but it's been a problem for a long time that people didn't really want to play Lucio in the last meta because it was like such a teamwork oriented character. I think they fixed that to some extent with the Lucio rework, but nonetheless, right? Like the more teamwork oriented the character, the less likely you're going to see it in ranked. I think is pretty common.
And enjoy it in ranked.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
The people who are playing it in ranked are like selfless players. They just really want to compete. They really want to win. They really want to fill what their team needs them to fill, and so they play those roles. But I feel like you would see a lot more of those players, to the point you made about, if they knew that at least that they would have the right team comp around them to play with them. Like playing solo tank is so much more frustrating than playing double tank. When you have another tank to work with, like tanks synergize so well together. Zarya Winston, Diva Winston. It's so much better than Winston and like a DPS, right? Although sometimes triple DPS is a good comp, it's even that I would say is map dependent and shouldn't be played 100% of the time. And it's also the other thing about triple DPS is it's super popular from the competitive meta, but it's very hard to play. Triple DPS is the hardest comp to play, I think, out of anything, because Winston has no support whatsoever and is just going to get deleted if he makes a single mistake. So it's really not rewarding to play Winston, or for that matter, the supports in triple DPS, because you're so unprotected. It's like a comp that relies around really, really good positioning, really, really good teamwork between like your soldier Zen and Lucio mostly, and like your Winston Tracer. Like it's all about having really precise calls and precise movements, always being in the right position, never getting caught out. That's why teams like Rogue were so successful, because they had such good teamwork and such good individual play in that style. But I think that in general, it's you're not even seeing triple DPS, right? If we were saying 3 DPS, 1 tank, 2 supports, I'd be like, all right, like I'm not going to complain about that in ranked. I'd be like, all right, this is fine. But when it's just the wrong comp and you're not playing it right, that's not fun for anybody. It's not fun for the DPS players. It's maybe a little bit it's probably not a little. It's maybe significantly less fun to be the support team oriented characters in that comp. But it's not really great for anyone. I don't think anybody really wants matchmaking to look like that in the long run. And I don't think that's anyone's dream for matchmaking, is where they have to make these solo plays and just play by themselves.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like. As you could probably tell, the conversation didn't end there, and there is more to talk about with Jake, and we will put it up in a part 2, but we didn't really want to make a 2-hour video for you guys in one go. So we'll be talking about Mercy and the meta in another video with Jake. So again, if you want to see that, let us know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed. This all has best intentions, and we just want the game to play like Overwatch and cure the toxicity as much as we can. I hope you all have a great day as always, guys. Take care and peace, people.